Welcome back, Flow Staters. We're so excited for today's episode. We're really honing in on one of Nora's specialties. I'm because I feel like I don't know very much in this area. So today, during the podcast, I'm really just going to play the other side, like the customer, the person struggling, and try to make sure that I'm asking questions to further understand how gut health can impact your hormones.
Love it. Yeah. I think this has become obviously a wildly trendy topic. We have the gut talk and it's a super trendy term right now, but what the heck is that? What does that even mean? Are there things that we can be doing or not doing to support it? And I kind of like to zoom all the way out and just say what our gut even is. So we have this one long tube from our mouth all the way to our bum. And through that's how we digest, that's how we absorb nutrition, the food that we're eating. And it's technically, if we think about it, it is outside of our body. Like nothing within that tube is meant to pass directly into our body unless something is kind of broken. And we're going to talk about that today. But it's interesting to think about, like, if you were to swallow a foreign object through your body, but it's never really entering in. So thinking even of this one long tube and how things move through this system is through small rhythmic contractions called peristalsis. And there's some really, really important connections here when it comes to our gut health. So the first thing that I always like to talk about is what's called motility. And we're going to talk about how different hormones impact the speed, also called transit time, of how things move from one end to the other.
So say that again. What is it called that moves it through?
Peristalsis.
So is there what you're saying is there is peristalsis health in terms of
Yep.
how quickly it moves through your body?
So peristalsis is like the muscles just contracting in our GI tract. And that's what moves the food from one end to the other. And there are things that
Interesting.
influence how quickly that happens or how slowly that happens.
And is it better for it to happen quickly or slowly?
We want kind of a Goldilocks perspective because we want enough time for that food to be in our system for us to be able to digest and absorb it. But when it's too long, so when I say too long, this is a little experiment that I have a lot of my clients do as like a motility test. If you were to swallow or eat in one sitting one beet or 2 tablespoons of sesame seeds, and you time, okay, I'm having this at lunchtime today. When do I see it on the other side? And that ideal timeline is about 24 to 72 hours. If it's if it's less than 24 hours, it's not spending enough time in our system for us to be able to digest and absorb all the nutrition. And if it's spending too much time inside, that can be a sign of what's called slow motility.
Interesting. I would
Yeah,
say I am the queen of the poo examination.
yeah.
I feel like I read somewhere or heard somewhere that kings and queens, basically their health was used to be determined by people inspecting their poop.
I love that.
So I'm
Never heard of that.
always I'm always the one that turns around and looks.
You
Sorry if
should.
that's sorry if that's
No.
TMI, but I feel like I'm definitely on the too fast train, which I think makes sense for a lot of what I know about my body, because I know that I eat really healthy, but I'm still prone to nutritional deficiency. So potentially I'm not absorbing enough nutrients from my food. So this is cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And even so, there's like ideal kind of consistency, color, and how often we should even be going to the bathroom. So I want everyone going to the bathroom every single day, at least once a day. So if we're not, then that's a really big red flag that something is going on or things are not working well. So that's
Yeah.
number one. How it looks, the color should be brown. If it's tan in color, if it's lighter in color, if it's pale, If there is obviously blood in the stool, those are all things that we want to be super mindful of. So you should turn around and look. Maybe it's not every day, but if you're sensing something might be kind of off in there, we can get a lot of information. Just like we can get a lot of information from looking at our period blood. Similarly, this is another kind of litmus test for us to see how things are moving. So if it's floating, that's not a great sign. That means there's going to be more fat in our stool where we should be absorbing that nutrition. So
Oh,
yeah, so we want, again, like brown, it should be smooth in consistency. It should be really easy to pass. It should feel complete. You shouldn't have this urge of like you always have to go, or you always feel like every time you're going to the bathroom, you're actually pooping a little bit. It should be this nice, complete, formed movement, really satisfying. This topic is my jam. I could talk about this all day with like no ick feelings. So if you're like, "Ooh, Nora, I don't know about these details," uh, it's cool. Everybody should.
yeah. I also have this book that's called "What's Your Poo? What's My Poo Telling Me?" or something like that. It's
Okay.
my favorite toilet like read. I keep it on the back of the toilet because I'll be like, this looks strange. We'll look it up. Like, uh, so I'm right there with you. Apologies to anyone listening who's grossed out by poo talk, but today we're just in it. We're in the
Yeah,
shit.
we're in the shit. There's a whole host of like bowel hygiene things, and that's like the first place that I start because that is a huge connection to hormones. So if we're not going to the bathroom every day, that is our body's main detoxification. That's how we're getting rid of excess hormones, cholesterols, heavy metals, chemicals, toxins, all the things in our body that's like, nope, gotta go. So if you're not going to the bathroom well every day, those things are going to be reabsorbed. The longer your stool sits in your colon and in the large intestine, the more water that's being reabsorbed. That's why it gets harder and harder to go to the bathroom and they come out looking like rabbit pebbles or little stones. It's because they're getting drier and drier and drier, and all of that stuff is being reabsorbed. So, this is your first check. Should be going to the bathroom every day. Should be brown, solid, smooth, easy to pass. You're not spending 15, 20 minutes in the bathroom. It should be like a quick transaction and you want to get out of there. At some point, we're going to have our pelvic floor doctor come on and talk about the importance and the connection between your pelvic floor health. And that's a really big piece that we'll touch on at that point. So, next, I kind of want to move into is that our gut and our brain have this bi-directional communication pathway. So, I'm sure you've heard the saying of like, go with your gut, or maybe you're going to do a presentation, or you're feeling a little anxious or stressed, and you actually go to the bathroom. That can be this like gut brain connection, and it goes both ways. And actually, the majority, it's over 80% of the signals are actually going from our gut to our brain. So it's listening all the time for feedback for what's going on. That's where this connects to things like our mood. So a lot of mood disorders like anxiety and depression can actually be stemmed from an imbalance that's going on in our gut. And 95% of our serotonin, which is our feel-good neurotransmitter, is made in the gut. So again, if things are off in there, that's going to make us feel really low and sad if we're missing that key neurotransmitter. Another huge piece, I was talking about this tube, the next layer of the lining is actually part of our immune system. Over 70% of our immune system is in the lining of our GI tract. And it makes sense because if we're exposed to foodborne pathogens, stuff in our water, things in the environment, it should not pass through that tube. So our immune system is the first line of defense there that says, hey, you are foreign, you don't belong here, and we're going to ramp up our immune response to get this out.
Real quick, too, maybe like on a high level, I know we're going to get into it even deeper. I love all these explanations and like so many things that I didn't know serotonin, immune system, like all of that. But how does this connect when it comes to hormones?
Mm-hmm.
Just because I know our audience is like very hormone focused, and I'm
Right.
just like really curious if, real quick, if there's like a high level like gut hormone
Yep.
connection.
Yep. So that's why I was saying with going to the bathroom. If we're not going to the bathroom daily, that's going to directly impact our hormones. So that's step number one. That's where I was starting with, like, if if that's not happening, then your hormones are not going to be regulated effectively. What I'll also move into is talking about there's a specific portion of our microbiome. So that's like the whole ecosystem of bacteria that lives mostly in our large intestine. And there's a section within there that actually is it directly manages how much estrogen our body holds onto and gets rid of. So those are two really, really big links that if there's any backups in the system or if there's any imbalance going on in the gut, it's going to directly impact the amount of estrogen in our body, and that's what can throw off the balance of our hormones.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that's so helpful just for people to be able to make that connection and understand like the importance and how it really does affect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like gut, like you said, it has become such a buzz.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's talking about probiotics, prebiotics. Do probiotics even work? Like, there's just so much that people are talking about. So I'm really excited to keep learning more. What else do you have for us?
All the things. I feel like a kind of second trendy term is leaky gut, which is actually
Mm,
not a true medical term. The true medical term is called intestinal hyperpermeability. So I think of like a castle, and if there was a door to get into the castle, there should be kind of like this whole barrier around the castle. And if there's any leaks in the barrier, if that can be due to things like medications, stress, diet, alcohol, smoking, even not getting enough sleep or exercise, things in our environment, any of that can disrupt the integrity of that barrier. That's what leaky gut is. So when there's some kind of gaps and things that should not be passing through the gut are, that can even be larger molecules of food, or like I was talking about, things in our water, environment, food-borne pathogens that can enter into that immune system layer and cause huge, robust response from our inflammation. It can enter into our bloodstream and really wreak havoc in our body. That's where like food sensitivities truly lie. They're different than an allergy, but it's typically when there's kind of like a breach in the tight junctions, is what they're called. The GI tract cells should be side by side by side, and that's where that leaky gut or intestinal hyperpermeability comes into play. And we want to prevent that as much as possible.
what are some of the symptoms of this leaky gut, quote
Yep.
unquote?
Yeah, absolutely. So, especially when it comes to whatever we're eating, specifically, if that is causing some immune response, you might experience things like brain fog or immediate going to the bathroom, a lot of inflammation in terms of that, and then even skin reactions, right? If you
Mm.
break out in hives after you eat something, or you have eczema patches on your body, or even acne, a lot of the skin stuff is really a reflection of what's going on the inside. So those are some things to look out for that we might say, oh, okay, things are off. You know, all of the GI symptoms that are present, they can be for a variety of reasons, but bloating, gas, reflux, diarrhea, constipation, all of those symptoms can also be a byproduct if this integrity has been impaired.
And if someone is experiencing this, is there, I mean, obviously there's something they can probably do. Is there, like next steps? Should they be working with someone, or are there just kind of some blanket suggestions where people can be thinking about repairing this?
Yeah, yeah. So I think even just kind of elaborating a little bit on the causes. So, we've talked a lot about birth control here, and that is a big connection where it can
Mm,
directly impact our gut health. So it can change the type, the number, the amount of the microbes in our microbiome. So that's the whole ecosystem of our bacteria that live again in the large intestine or the colon. So, birth control can directly change that environment, which is not good for our overall health, our metabolic health, everything. um, so yeah, in addition to other medications, especially taking NSAIDs, so like ibuprofen for pain management, that's something that can impact the gut lining. Like I said, diet, if there are specific foods that are bothersome, that doesn't mean that you can't have them for forever. If it's not an allergy response, that is just a sign. If you're like, I have 10 foods that sit well in my system, that's a big red flag to me that there's something going on here. And when we repair that lining, you should be able to tolerate all of those foods again. Some common ones even are, quote, healthy foods like cashews and apples and pears, mango, avocado, beans, broccoli, cauliflower, all of those, if they cause a lot of GI issues like gas and bloating, ding, 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 something's off.
Mm. I think that's so powerful for people to hear because, people will just write it off as a sensitivity and avoid it forever. And so many of these foods, contain so many important nutrients and allow us like creativity with what we
Yeah,
eat. And just kind of writing something off as like, oh no, I'm sensitive to that. But knowing that, there is hope for you being able to eat something that's maybe affecting you today, I think is really, really good to hear.
absolutely. And the best diet that we can, diverse diet. The more different types of foods that we have, that even includes things like gluten and dairy, which, get an awful rap. But the more foods that you can incorporate into your diet, the happier your gut will be because each food has a different nutrient profile. They each contain different fibers and things that are going to feed those good gut bugs.
Mm.
So that, and then think about all the different colors from those foods alone. Each one's have different antioxidants and flavonoids and things that are really, really beneficial. So we want to make sure we're able to tolerate a wide variety of foods for many reasons. I'm also like I live to eat type of person. I'm not
Same.
just eat for survival needs. So for me, it really boils down to quality of life stuff too. A lot of people that I work with, whether it's not being able to go out to eat with friends or family or going to a family gathering and having to bring their own food, like that impacts your quality of life. This is not just a nice to have thing. It's a need to have, not just for your health, but for your mental health, for your ability to socialize and have good relationships with yourself, with your body, with your food, and with others.
I agree. Food is like a spice of life, and I need it. Like,
Yeah,
I need to have fun with it. I need to enjoy it. And it sucks when
yeah,
you're experiencing a sensitivity to something. I ebb and flow with different sensitivities often.
mm,
And yeah, it really stinks when you're like, ooh, that really upset me.
yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing I know you're saying, like, are there things that we can be doing? So, just real quick, tangible stuff is digestion starts before the food even enters our mouth. So, not eating at your desk, not eating while you're on your phone, not eating any distracted meals, being more mindful with your meals themselves, chewing your food thoroughly, not standing while you're eating, being in a seated position. Those are some really simple and digestible tips that are going to benefit your digestion and in turn also can reduce bloating for people, can just make that process better. If you're not looking at your food, you're actually not absorbing the same amount of nutrition as you are if you're having a more mindful meal.
Really? Why is that?
Because if you're distracted, if you're not paying attention to it, there's research showing that if you're not looking at the food, your body is not able to absorb and digest, get the maximum benefit from the nutrition as when you're paying attention to it.
Oh my God, that is insane.
Yeah,
Pause for Bluey.
yes. I don't know what is going on.
Just give him a minute to get his barks out.
gave him a jar of peanut butter.
It's probably gone.
An empty one. No, there's definitely something out there.
Okay, where do you want to take this next?
Um,
Microbiome?
yeah, I'll just talk, I think, going into more like the prebiotics, probiotics question and answer there, and then a little bit more of the like specifics of things that we can be doing.
Okay, I think we can go.
It's good.
It's okay if there's some barks. I mean, I don't mind.
I can put him downstairs in the basement too, if he doesn't stop. Um, I do think like two other important components too, though, is like if we're not getting enough nutrition, this is another thing that I see with individuals where they might be experiencing constipation, and it's literally just because if you don't have a source of input, if you don't have something to move the food through the tube with more food, nothing's going to come out.
Mmm.
It does, sometimes we make it so much more complicated than it needs to be. We really just have to do these kind of fundamental things first, those mindful meals, chewing our food thoroughly, paying attention to what we're eating, not scarfing down our food. If you get hiccups or some after, like, you know you're eating too quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting thing to think about too, is like you have to be eating enough in order to be having regular bowel movements.
Yep.
And hydrating enough, I
Yes.
am assuming, is part of the equation as well. So I think having that thought and mindfulness, Mandy and I were just talking about this yesterday of like, we have days as business owners where you forget to eat.
Yeah.
Not forget to eat, but like don't
It's
eat
never happened to me.
enough. Don't eat enough. Or wait too long to have your first meal or something. And now I'm gonna think of that when I have those days. Am I like, is that affecting my bowel movements?
Oh, totally. But it's also,
Um,
if you're not fueling yourself, you can't expect to have the same level of productivity or concentration, or you're going to have brain fog. You're not going to be thinking if you're under fueling or over exercising even. Like those things directly impact our gut health.
yeah, I'm so guilty of that, and now I'm gonna be mindful of it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's fair though. Like I even ideally, we want to space our meals to support our gut health too. You don't want to be grazing all day. There's a difference between having smaller, more frequent meals and eating nonstop throughout the day and kind of curbing your hunger, or just eating enough to curb your hunger. That's not beneficial for our gut either. We have these internal cleansing waves that actually take place. I picture like a dishwashing cycle where if you're fasted for 90 to 120 minutes, these dishwashing cycles, it's called the migrating motor complex, occurs, and that's what helps to pick up like leftover debris, bacteria, fungi, yeast, things that are left behind, and flushes them, keeps them moving. But if you're constantly eating, or even if you're drinking something in between meals that has energy in it, calories, that is enough to tell that cleansing wave not to take place. And then if your cleansing waves aren't happening and the bacteria is building up, that's how we get overgrowth. That's how we get dysbiosis, or this imbalance in that good and not so good bacteria living in our gut.
Super interesting.
Yeah. So I think with that too, I'd love to share just kind of what probiotics are, what are prebiotics. I know you touched on. Now there's even information coming out about what are called postbiotics. He is just having a day. Okay, I'm gonna mark down what time this
I already have them down. I'm taking notes, and um, so I can pass that to Sindri. It's totally fine. Don't stress about it.
more work. I'm sorry, Sindri. I might just go put him downstairs so that we can't hear
Go
him
for
real
it.
quick, if that's okay.
Yep.
Thanks. Whew, okay.
Yay.
I don't think this will be like that long though. Should be good.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're good at whatever. This is obviously a really sought after topic, so I think
Yeah.
like people will love it. Already there's so many bangers in here that I'm like,
Good. Good. Good.
okay. Want to just say restarting when you're restarting.
Yep. Okay, restarting. So just to kind of elaborate a little bit more on what the microbiome is, I just alluded to like good bacteria and not so good bacteria. So these bacteria are mostly beneficial. Like we want to have them. They contribute to our overall health. And there are things, like I mentioned, that can throw off that balance. But now there's so much more research and data coming out about how they impact our long term health, even for things like autoimmunity and diabetes and our weight status. So I'm so excited. This is such an interesting time to be in the world and field of nutrition because of this research that's continuing to come out.
I hope also, just a side note, but I hope that the research they are doing, they're differentiating men from women.
Yeah.
I
No,
mean,
it's a really good point. I mean, there's less research done on women always, up until now, and hopefully that's something that is continuing to change because women were mostly excluded because of our hormones, because it makes things more complicated. But that's really important information that we need to know. So,
very important and more complicated isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think it, you know, we're just more interesting.
yes, definitely. Yeah. But I think what's really interesting is our microbiome is formed in utero, like when we're inside of our mother, and even things that are going on during her pregnancy. So if there is a stressful situation like loss or illness, things, a global pandemic, that can actually impact the microbiome of the baby. And then if you're born via C-section, or vaginal delivery also will then impact your gut microbiome. If you're born via C-section and you're born into an operating room, it's a sterile environment versus being born through the vaginal canal, you're actually being coated in your mom's vaginal flora. Yum, I know. But that is the first, what's called inoculation. We're swallowing that, it's going into our system, and it's helping to start that beautiful microbiome for us. And then if we're breastfed versus formula fed, like this stuff starts really, really early on. And that those first like 5 years are really important for our gut microbiome. And I hope that is also just further fuel for us as future parents or wherever we are in life to really ensure, this is a time where there's a lot of antibiotics that might be used that can wipe out the beneficial bacteria, for example, or not maybe eating as many fiber-rich foods, for example, as well, that can impact
Yeah.
that.
One of the things that I'm curious to ask is in terms of, I'm trying to phrase this properly. If someone has had disruption to their microbiome, there's hope that you can fix it, right? Like it's not like
Absolutely.
permanent damage.
Nope. The whole microbiome turns over every 6 to 8 weeks. Our cells are turning over in our GI tract every 2 to 3 days. So that's why, like, if you get a stomach bug or, it could have some longer term impacts in the short term. But that's why also our diet plays a really, really dramatic role in how we can directly change those things and things like probiotics. So, what are probiotics? Probiotics are the actual strains of bacteria. And when we're ingesting them from food sources, thinking from things like yogurt or kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, fermented foods like pickles, if they're truly fermented, or even some types of vinegars like apple cider vinegar, when it says with the mother, that means it's containing probiotics. So we're getting them naturally through our diet and some taking up residence in our gut. And then you can also supplement. I don't think everybody needs a probiotic. There's a million different types on the market. They all have different purposes. It's important to work with somebody. And you also, if you are taking one, you don't want to take the same one for a long period of time. You actually want to rotate them. So as I'm saying, your whole system changes over every 6 to 8 weeks. You want to rotate your probiotics every few months so that you're not just bombarding your system with the same strains, amount, type of bacteria over and over and over again.
Super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say you don't think everyone needs a probiotic, is that just because people have more resilient guts or be resilient guts? Or like they are eating more probiotic rich foods?
Yeah, diet quality would play a big factor in that, but also for the population that I work with mainly, if you already have too much good or bad bacteria and you're taking a probiotic, sometimes it can make your symptoms worse.
Oh, interesting.
So that's another kind of litmus test where if you start a probiotic or a prebiotic, which we'll dive into, and things are exaggerated, you're like, okay, we need to pull back. That's definitely, all these things, like, of course, I'm going to say work with someone. That's what I do. And I love helping people through this because it is really convoluted. But everybody's like a unique puzzle to me. And I love piecing things together. Even like our oral microbiome makes a difference into what's going through our system. If you have a lot of dental issues, that can actually be impacting your health. Or if you've had a brain injury, if you've had multiple concussions or you've been in a car accident, that can impact your GI tract and how things are moving through the system. So everybody's complex.
Yeah, interesting. And you say don't like not everyone needs a probiotic supplement. I also know people who will do things like an apple cider vinegar shot a day. Is that
Mm-hmm.
similar? Like, where you should be switching it up every 6 weeks, or is that something that you think is beneficial?
So with apple cider vinegar, this is a whole topic in and of itself, but there's a lot of different benefits that can come from apple cider vinegar. One, it's helpful for blood sugar control. It has been shown to be helpful. Two would be the bacterial benefits. And even for some people, if they have lower stomach acid and you're taking that apple cider vinegar before a meal, it can actually help make that environment a little bit more acidic, help you to digest and break down those foods, and make your digestion work a little bit more efficiently. I wouldn't worry so much about rotating the apple cider vinegar, especially if you're incorporating other sources like yogurt or kimchi or sauerkraut, whatever.
I love that. I might start implementing that just because I kind of like hearing the benefits of it, and I love a little like tincture in bubbly water or
Same.
something. Could be
Bitters is my
delish.
favorite. Yeah, and it is not for some people too. Like if you have any history of stomach ulcers or think about pouring lime juice on a cut finger, like it stings like a mother.
Stings, yeah.
Right? So we don't want to do that to our insides, and we want to give it time to heal. So if it causes like an increase in some of your symptoms like reflux or burning sensation, bothering your esophagus a lot, that might not be for you, or at least diluting it. Never taking it straight. I say like a 1 to 4 ratio. So if you're doing like 1 ounce of apple cider vinegar, I would do it in 4 ounces of water.
Yeah. I
Helps
also
you
love
get that.
adding it to salad dressing. So that
Oh,
could be a
yeah.
good way to get it into. Delicious.
Perfect. So, yeah, prebiotics, conversely, are the fibers that actually feed the probiotics or those bacteria. So, that's where it is really important that we're incorporating a lot of different types of fiber and getting enough fiber in general. The recommendations are 25 grams of fiber for women daily and 38 grams of fiber for men. I think it's hard if you're not tracking, and I don't typically recommend that. So I just say having a good source of fiber at each meal time or something that you can identify as a source of fiber at each meal. So, even having your oatmeal, there's some fiber in that, but adding like ground flax seeds or chia seeds or some nuts, those are all going to be good sources of fiber. At lunchtime, having a source of something green is going to increase your fiber intake. It doesn't just have to come from fruit, for example.
Yeah, I'm a big psyllium husk fan too. Psyllium husk makes your poop like wonder poops.
Yes, I love psyllium husk, and that, yes, can be a game changer for a lot of people and in both directions. So, if you actually experience loose stools, it can help to slow that transit time and bulk up your stool. If you experience constipation, it might be because you don't have enough fiber in your diet, and that can also be a good source. It's super easy. I don't know about you. I just like spoon it down with a little bit of water and it's fine. I don't like drinking it. But,
Yeah, it makes water kind of gelatiny.
mm-hmm.
We honestly use it in some sauces to make them thicker, even when we cook, like a stir fry sauce or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, sometimes I'll just like pour a little bit in a quick protein shake up and chug it down. So,
Nice.
and it is a considered a prebiotic fiber, right? Is that
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Exactly. It's soluble, so it's that like that's why it gets almost like jelly like. Similar with chia seeds, right? If you put chia seeds in water, they expand, and it's the same thing. It's creating a gel like substance.
Love it.
So the last bit is what are called postbiotics. So these are like a product that the bacteria during fermentation, that's normal, that happens in our gut where we're feeding them that fiber, they're fermenting it. That's where gas is created. And it's a natural process. I picture it like a little brewery in there. But the postbiotics, things like short chain fatty acids are produced. Specifically, one example is called butyrate. These are really, really helpful for keeping the lining of your GI tract intact and healthy. It's beneficial for the mucosal lining. So there's like the innermost layer of our GI tract. We want to keep that healthy. That's our barrier. And the best way to do this is actually doing cooked and then cooled starches. So things like potatoes or even white rice, when we cook the starch, it changes its shape, and when we cool it, it changes its shape, and that helps to feed these really beneficial bacteria and create a higher amount of the short chain fatty acids. I always get this question is if I reheat them, does it change it back? And the answer is no. So if you like make a big pot of rice for the week that you're going to use as your starch during lunch, for example, and then it cools, cool it in room temperature, put it in the fridge to store, obviously, and then if you reheat it, you're still going to get that benefit.
Oh my God, I love that. I do that a lot with a
Perfect.
lot of different dishes. Sweet, like I do a lot of sweet potato on salads and stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
it'll like be batched out. So that's really cool to hear. And again, what are the benefits of the postbiotics?
So that they make short chain fatty acids. An example of one of those is called butyrate, and they help to protect the lining, so the barrier of our GI tract. They've also been shown to help with our blood sugar control as well. So,
Wow.
really interesting. Like, if you were to make rice and eat it fresh versus if you were to make rice, cool it, and then reheat it, it's actually going to impact the way that our body uses that sugar from the starch, and we'll have a lower, what's called glycemic response than if we were to eat it when it was fresh.
Super interesting. I feel like that is going to blow some people's minds, especially people who are dealing with, blood sugar issues and have a lot of those spikes.
Yeah,
That could be a huge unlock for someone.
yeah. I just started reading the book by the glucose goddess. It's called Glucose Revolution. So so interesting. And I'm wearing a CGM right now, the continuous glucose monitor. I love incorporating this just for understanding more about how my body works and individual differences. I wear it at the same time as my husband, and our reactions to food are completely different. It can be dependent on your hydration status, your sleep status, if you are
Mm,
hungover. There are so many different variables that determine how your body uses sugar differently. And when I say sugar, I don't just mean like table sugar or added sugar. Every time we're eating any source of carbohydrates, our body is turning that into sugar in our body. That's our primary fuel source. It's essential, but it's really important that we're not experiencing these peaks and valleys for our blood sugar balance.
super interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so the last bit that I talked about a little bit earlier, and like where is this connection, is that estrobolome. So the section of our GI tract and within the microbiome is the estrobolome. So these are specific bacteria that help to regulate the amount of estrogen that our body is keeping and throwing. So again, if there's any kind of imbalance or you're experiencing a lot of GI symptoms, dysbiosis can actually send off our stress response in our body. It's like we're having this immune reaction. It can make us feel sick. In addition to all of the GI issues, this is where there can be a lot of hormonal symptoms, in addition to acne, but even like having a yeast or fungal overgrowth. There's even data linking it to predisposing you to endometriosis, which I think is really interesting. People with PCOS have been shown to have lower amounts of that beneficial bacteria in general. So there's a lot of overlap between the health of our microbiome, our gut in general, and these hormonal conditions. That's why I start here. I always start
Mm-hmm.
in the gut, and I know you asked, like, is it a chicken or the egg situation when it comes to, like, do the hormone problems start first or do the GI problems start first? And it's really hard to say. And even different practitioners approach this differently too. Like, having adequate hormone status also protects the health of our gut. But if our gut is off, it's also going to impact how our body is regulating the amount of hormones in our body. If there's inflammation in our gut too, it's typically sending signals to other organs like our thyroid, which that can impact and slow down our whole motility. So people with low or underactive thyroid, that impacts the transit time that I was talking about in the beginning of how quickly things move from one end to another. So that's something I will typically investigate for people, is to make sure their thyroid is functioning well, optimally, and addressing a lot of the GI issues, even like before we're coming off of birth control, in order to prevent a lot of those symptoms that I see people having, that like post pill syndrome. I trying to get ahead of it by addressing the underlying issue first. Or, if that's not the case for you and we're in a retroactive, it's okay. We can still heal, we can fix things, but that's why I start here.
Yeah, the connection is just unbelievable. And thanks for explaining the like chicken or the egg. It
Yeah,
seems like it's just very dependent and it can go both ways.
exactly.
Obviously, the nutrients that we're absorbing play a huge role, but also like just it's incredible. Every time I feel like we come back to the same thing of like everything is interconnected,
Yes.
and the lifestyle changes that you can make for your hormone health will also support every other bodily function. Like
Yeah.
it's all just about having solid routines in your life
Mm-hmm.
that support you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. We always talk about these like period poops too, and this is what I'll end on, since we were talking about like transit time. So how our hormones can directly impact how our system is flowing, so to speak. So progesterone in the second half of our cycle, in the luteal phase when it's higher, slows down that transit time and can lead to constipation. So if you notice that things are a little bit more sluggish during that time frame, again, really focusing, even circle back to the cycle syncing episode that we recorded, in the fibers that are going to be really helpful to promote and keep you moving. Or we just talked about like adding psyllium husk in at that time might be really beneficial, and making sure hydration is on point to keep things flowing. The earlier half of your cycle, when estrogen is a little bit higher, and just hormone levels are lower in general, is when things are going to be moving a bit more quickly. So that's why, even like at the beginning of your cycle, when the hormones change, when they fall off, things go low, we can have looser stools, and that's for a couple of reasons too. So lower hormone status, but also this prostaglandin. So we talked about this briefly before too, but it's like our inflammatory response. So when the lining is shedding, getting ready to shed at the beginning of our cycle, it is an inflammatory process. So even that like aggravation, everything is so close together down there. It's enough that it can cause looser stools to occur.
Yeah, for sure, something that I experience, and like a indicator to me. I mean, I track my cycle anyway, so I know it's coming, but I can be like, oh, like I'm probably going to start my period tomorrow because today I had a very different stool situation.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I'd love for you to answer is just like, that's doesn't mean that you're in hormonal dysfunction. That's pretty normal, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I would just say like loading up on a lot of those anti-inflammatory foods in the days leading up to your cycle can be really helpful to especially help with cramps and to help with this lining shedding. Things I love are like turmeric, ginger can be extremely helpful at this time if you are experiencing some GI upset too. Some people get like nausea and vomiting when their cycle is about to start too. It could be due to pain or this prostaglandins, the inflammatory response. If you eat fish, like incorporating salmon or higher omega-3 fatty acid foods, sardines, walnuts, chia seeds, and even some vitamin E rich foods, things like almonds especially. So those are going to be really, really helpful in reducing the overall level of inflammation and making it an easier transition of going into your cycle, less of the cramping and looser stools.
Shout out to the That Time of the Month tea that we just launched because it does have ginger in it. So that obviously Nora said has amazing anti-inflammatory properties, but that's one of the reasons that we put that ingredient in there.
Love, love that. I love ginger in general, especially for motility benefits. So that helps to move the food along in our system. It supports that overall end to end, that peristalsis, motility, everything that we've been talking about. So incorporating fresh ginger, ginger tea, it's going to be a beautiful, beautiful addition to your regimen.
Amazing. Okay, one of the questions that I have before we wrap up is you obviously work with a lot of clients on GI and hormone. Like you mentioned, with a lot of your hormone clients, you're even starting with GI stuff. Can you talk a little bit about some of the testing that you offer around GI health and kind of just educate the audience on why you might suggest those different tests and what information someone could really get from them?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, first, in the way that I like to work with people is making sure we have those fundamentals, the foundations are locked in, because if we don't address those, we can treat you all day long, but it's going to come back. There are things that we have to do, whether it is those more mindful meals and supporting the motility, all of the things that we've been talking about. If that doesn't change, if you're stressed as hell, your issues are going to come rushing back. I can't wave that magic wand, unfortunately. I wish I could. um, I think this is so funny. Anytime your dog or pet gets sick and you bring them to the vet, what's the first thing they do? They do a poop test. They
Yeah.
test your stool, the pet's stool, because the pet can't say what's wrong. So this is what I like to do. It really gives us clarity as to exactly what is going on in there. And as I mentioned, that really big important marker of our immune system. So I see this often on both ends of the spectrum, either really, really low immune function or really, really high immune function, and how that is going to impact our gut. So I'll do testing. I start there. It takes us a couple of weeks to get the report back. So that gives us time to start really addressing those fundamentals, getting that in place, new habits, before we start implementing some of the GI stuff.
Question
Yeah.
question about the stool like testing or samples.
Mm-hmm.
And this might be you might not have an answer for this, or this might not even be an issue, but for women, do you like to test at a certain time in their cycle, their stools? Or does it matter?
No, because it's like I was saying, the whole microbiome turns over every 6 to 8 weeks. Like if you were to do it on day 15, it's probably not going to look very different than it would on day
Got
20
it.
or 25. Same thing, like people will ask, do I need to stop my probiotic or should, XYZ? Most oftentimes the answer is no, because we want to get a baseline for what is going on presently in there.
Got it.
Yeah, great question. But yeah, the number one thing I hear from people is just the validity. When they've been told time and time again, they go to the doctor, whether it's a GI doctor or not, and they say, oh, you have IBS. In my opinion, IBS is a BS diagnosis. It's irritable bowel syndrome. It's a diagnosis of exclusion. It's like, I don't know what's wrong with you. Sorry, I can't help you. But there are so many things that we can do, and it's just stuff that unfortunately is not being taught in traditional medicine settings. Uh, Things are starting to change, and I think over the next 20 years we'll see a huge difference in traditional medicine in general. But this is from more of a preventative standpoint and things that we can be doing right now to impact long-term health, for example, in these changes or address what you're experiencing right now. Number one thing I hear is bloating, having a lot of gas, having irregular or constipation, diarrhea, or both. All of those symptoms, there's likely a root cause, something going on in there, and that's what this just illuminates for us. We're not guessing.
Yeah. So that's the stool sample. Is there
Mm-hmm.
anything else that you do with your clients beyond that?
For GI stuff,
Yeah.
that's the only GI stool test that I use. As I mentioned, those quick little like science experiment of seeing where motility stands. We
Yeah.
also can see if you have enough stomach acid, as I alluded to with like the apple cider vinegar test too. Um, those things are really important for us to be absorbing adequate nutrition, and we need to make sure those things are in place first as well. But that's the only testing I do for GI. The hormone testing I will sometimes do depending on the situation, and I'll either do regular labs for some people or use something like a Dutch, which is a dried urine sample, to get a really in-depth picture. But I don't always use that one.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
Amazing. Anything else that you want to share with the audience before we sign off today?
Yeah. I would say, again, I don't want this to be overwhelming. I think that there are a lot of small things that you can do to help your gut as is. And if I could encourage you to start somewhere, it'd just be paying more attention to your actual meals, setting time aside when possible. I understand not every single meal is going to be seated at the table, no calm, relaxed, but uh, trying to implement more of that into your day to day is really going to help with your overall digestion. Making the most, you can eat all these beautiful fruits and veggies and proteins, but if you're not absorbing them, then what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah, you're just wasting your money.
Yeah, literally down the toilet.
Amazing. Well, I hope everyone listening is going to take 15 or 20 minutes today to have a mindful meal. I know I'm going to try to implement this practice for myself. So I'm excited to kind of see and maybe turn around and take a look at your poo.
Yes, yes. And if you are curious in working together, I have my group that's available. We can do testing in there. We can work together one on one. I love doing this because for me, it's all about quality of life, and this work is so tied to our quality of life, and that's really important to me.
So important. I think longevity and quality of life is like the number one thing on my radar these days. So
Absolutely.
thank you, Nora, for sharing all of this amazing information. So many good takeaways today. For anyone listening, if you found this helpful, please make sure to rate and review. And of course, like share it with a friend or dive into our DMs and ask us follow-up questions. We will see you next week on the Flow State Podcast.